Minister Jean-Paul Adam, thank you for joining me on the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Fazila. Good to be here.
First and foremost, let us talk about the blue economy concept, a blueprint to tap the ocean's resources for transforming the coastal economies. But it goes beyond that. And recently, you had a Blue Economy Summit in Abu Dhabi, co-hosted by the UAE. Tell us about it.
Well, for us, the blue economy in Seychelles, countries such as Seychelles, we tend to call ourselves small island developing states. But more and more, we're thinking of ourselves as large ocean nations, because certainly in the case of Seychelles, we have only 454 square kilometers of land, but we have over 1.3 million square kilometers of ocean. So the logic for us in terms of new development prospects more likely are going to come from the ocean. And it's very important for us to be looking at frameworks for this, because when we look at the existing framework for ocean development around the world, there is a real vacuum. Too often, the basis for example, fisheries is simply to allow big third country industrial fleets to come and fish in developing countries. This is not sustainable in the long run. That's not to say we don't need investment, that we don't need partnerships, that we don't need foreign vessels coming. We do. But it needs to be looked at in a manner which is much more inclusive of the whole economy in these coastal and island countries. And in the same way with other resources that are yet untapped in the ocean, which can include, for example, using algae for energy, algae for example, pharmaceuticals, also tapping minerals that may be on the seabed. But we have to have a framework which empowers the countries where these resources are. It cannot just be big, established players that are just literally hoovering up. We need to have a framework which talks about equitable development and sustainable development. And that's what the blue economy is all about.
Now, let's move on to piracy in the region. Piracy is a great concern to the islands. How is Seychelles dealing with piracy?
Well, I think we've been very successful in actually breaking the piracy business model. Today, certainly in the case of Seychelles, it's been 1.5 years since we have not registered a single successful piracy attempt. So we've managed to arrive at this through several means. Firstly, through the partnership with the international community, there's a much better patrolling of the Indian Ocean. So Seychelles, obviously, we have a small number of maritime resources, but with the European Union, with other countries of the region, we are able to cover a large amount of ocean. The other thing that we've done in Seychelles is we've really boosted our air capacity. So we've received donations, for example, from India, of a special Dornier aircraft, from the UK, from the United Arab Emirates, and we're using these aircraft to have a better picture. And we've also coupled this with a better radar footprint of what's going on in our area. And the key as well has been better intelligence sharing. So in Seychelles, we've set up a regional intelligence sharing center, which has helped us to collate all of the information about what's going on in the region, not only relating to piracy, but the whole concept of maritime security, which includes the issues of drug trafficking, people trafficking, arms trafficking, which are real threats in this region because of the issues of Somalia itself. But we've managed to, I would say, now be in a proactive stance, whereas before we had to react to what was happening. We are now actually cutting the roots of many of these criminal activities, which are also indirectly linked to the terrorist issues that are occurring linked to Al-Shabaab in Somalia. So we have been successful through the partnerships that we have with different countries, but we certainly don't consider that the battle is won. It's something where we have to sustain our political will to tackle these criminal activities.
But I believe you have also engaged the Somalis.
We have. We in fact have very good bilateral relations with them. And I think another part of the success we have to recognize is that the new Somali government is more inclusive, and they recognize that they have to establish the rule of law. They don't necessarily have the capacity to do so, but they are engaged with partners of the region to try and do this. So one thing that Seychelles has done with the support of the Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO, but also with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, we're trying to put together capacity building programs which are based in realities to help the Somalis. So for example, fisheries development. The Somalis also have the problem of if you have European vessels that are coming and talking about fishing and at the same time trying to advise them on the framework, there is a discrepancy. They cannot trust the same vessels that have been looting their seas for decades to now put in the framework when there is a little bit more stability. So they've looked to us, where in Seychelles we have now for over 30 years a very successful tuna fishing industry, which is based on both local ownership, so we have a very strong artisanal and semi-industrial, including processing for export, which is locally owned, in addition to having the third countries, the European Union and so on, fishing in our waters as part of industrial fishing. So they're looking a little bit at our legal framework as a model to develop fisheries in Somalia. And we're very happy to do that, because ultimately developing viable economies based around fisheries in Somalia will further undermine criminal activity in Somalia.
Now, let's move on to cooperation among the islands. There is a shared continental shelf with Mauritius that you are going to exploit with Mauritius. It's a good way to exploit the resources in a sustainable way, isn't it?
Well, we feel that this is one of the great innovations that two islands have managed to do, because there is this space which existed between the edge of the Mauritian EEZ and the Seychelles EEZ, which is the Saya de Mala Plateau, which is a continuation both of the Mauritius side of the Mascarene Plateau and the Seychelles side of the same Mascarene Plateau. So we both had claims vis-à-vis the United Nations Law of the Sea to the extended continental shelf of that area. Now, we have both started to make those claims. And the Prime Minister of Mauritius, Navin Ramgoolam, and the President of Seychelles, President James Michel, they sat down and they actually realized that if we are both to put in a bid and then present it to the United Nations and then go for arbitration, it will take 20 years, because just putting together the geological evidence will take 10 years. Then you have all the legal arguments to put together, and then it has to be going to the queue for the United Nations tribunals to hear the case. So we decided 20 years is too long, in consideration that there is a real resource there that could benefit both of us immediately. So we took the decision to simply go for benefit sharing. And we simply said that zone will be a zone co-managed by the two countries, where all of the resources will be 50-50. And this is the basis, I would say, very historic agreement, which allows us now to come up with very innovative structures on how we can develop that area, because there's huge potential. For example, the obvious ones are oil exploration, but then there's all the other elements which are feasible, including, for example, there are huge seagrass beds in that area. There's a huge biodiversity benefit. There's the possibility of minerals on the seabed. And we are now moving to the phase of actually establishing joint ventures and structures to help develop these aspects of the blue economy, the oceanic economy. And this will give a new era of development for island states such as ours. But we think also gives a template for African states, because for too long, Africa has not taken ownership of its oceans. Other people have come and fished, other people have come and polluted. Even the trade very often is organized through shipping links that are organized from elsewhere. We need to have more African-owned businesses linking to the resources in the ocean and ensuring that there is more ownership of those resources in the region.
Mm-hmm. Which brings me to the question about the oil reserves, oil and gas reserves. The future of the Seychelles is going to change, which means to say that you have a very bright future with the exploration of oil in your waters.
Well, the approach we've always taken is we've been involved in exploration now for over 10 years. We've done very extensive exploration, and very importantly, we set the legal framework with the assistance of the Commonwealth, but also other partners, including the United States. So we have a very strong legal framework, which we established over 5 years ago, before we had any, I would say, perspective of finding oil. And it's very important, I think, to have that legal framework early. And even one of the things we are working with Mauritius is to have a similar framework in Mauritius in the context of the joint development of this shared zone. But we have never banked on these possibilities. So we are doing the exploration. If, perhaps I should not say if, I say when oil is found, because all of the data indicates that the oil is there, that there are very large possibilities of having hydrocarbon deposits, both oil and gas. But the only time you will know whether this is commercially exploitable or not will be when you do the test drilling. And there are several companies that are taking options to do that, which is, of course, very encouraging. But for us, this, if it happens and if it occurs, is all, I would say, a bonus to our economy. It is not something that we have actually factored in to our growth rate, because we feel it would be dangerous to do so, because then you are going on we believe that the fundamentals of our economy are very sound, based on tourism, based on services. And even if we do find oil, that fundamental part of our economy will not actually change.
Yeah, because oil doesn't last forever.
Exactly. All oil will do, it will bring another revenue stream, which will of course be very welcome, but it should not change our economic strategy. And we are also very conscious of the environmental perspectives of this, so we're putting in very, very stringent rules about how this can be explored. We're also going to be protecting large parts of our EZ, so it's not going to be every single part of our EZ that will be available for oil exploration. And we're also conscious of preserving a way of life in Seychelles, which is very special and we should not change. So for us, we are excited by the possibilities, but we are not overwhelmed by them, and nor are we banking on them.
Your country, the Seychelles, Mr. Minister, views itself as a champion of small island states. It is bidding for a non-permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council for 2017.
Yes, well, Seychelles, if we are successful in our bid to serve as a non-permanent member of the United Nations, we will be the smallest country to have ever done so. And we have been making the point that we have to give a voice to the voiceless. We are in the International Year of Small Island Developing States, declared by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, as a means of giving more attention to the plight of islands. And our point has always been that islands are, in fact, the conscience of the world. We have been on climate change. We were the first to talk about climate change. And the climate change, even though is unfortunately seen as an island issue, it is actually an issue that affects everyone. And so it is, and also on the major issues even that affect the world today in terms of peace and security. We are not nuclear powers, nor are we powers that will try and influence big debates through economic deals. We don't have those kind of mechanisms of persuasion. So the only methods of persuasion we actually have is the moral argument. So, for example, countries such as Seychelles, we are very well situated to be a conscience in these big debates. And we feel that on a number of issues, and I'll take the example of piracy, where even though we are small, we have been very conscious that unless there is concerted action, we are actually fundamentally creating a problem for trade in this whole region. Over 50% of all pirates that have been prosecuted in the Indian Ocean and Horn of Africa have been prosecuted in Seychelles. And this is a very important milestone because it allowed the end of impunity. Criminality persists if there is a feeling that you can get away with it. So of course, there's a lot of other elements that come into the fight against piracy, but ending the impunity was a key element. So we are small, but we can bring a contribution, and we want to be that voice. And what I'm very proud about, and in fact I'm very encouraged about, is that it has always been a tradition of Africa to not just squash these voices. In fact, in Africa, there are no small countries and big countries. Within the African Union, the founding charter of the African Union, all countries are equal. And it is one of the forums where this is generally respected. We have the principle of rotation within the African Union. And a lot of African countries are fully behind our bid because they fully believe in this principle that all countries should have a chance to have a say and all countries should have a chance to contribute. So we are very excited. We are, I think, very well placed. We have the full support of the island states, for example, of the Indian Ocean Commission that have, in their last meeting, declared their support for us. We also have support of, I would say, the large majority of African states. But of course, we're still in the negotiation phase. And we feel that by putting forward this candidature, we, in any case, are highlighting issues that need to be highlighted.
The fourth summit of the Indian Ocean Commission will be taking place in Moroni, in the Comoros. And recently the ministers met, in fact, to talk about the forthcoming summit. What came out of that meeting?
Well, the Indian Ocean Commission is at a very interesting juncture because we were first and foremost a political grouping of islands, but we have really realized that the strength of our organization is to tackle those structural constraints that are linked to our insularity. As island countries, we have to highlight those specificities and make sure that we are not left behind in a lot of the big debates that are happening currently. For example, countries such as Seychelles and Mauritius, we have already gained by being part of the wider groupings such as SADC, such as COMESA. We benefit from free trade. But we don't benefit in all ways, because when roads and infrastructure on the continent are built, they don't connect us. We still pay a very high price for importation of products because of the inefficiencies of the maritime routes, maritime networks, the problems around ports where it still takes a long time to turn around containers in a lot of this region. So these are challenges these are the specificities of the COE. So very much the focus now is turning towards addressing these key constraints. The issue of connectivity through maritime hubbing, the issue of air connectivity, which is also a huge problem. And Seychelles will be hosting in June this year a special ministerial meeting of ministers of tourism and transport to actually create in the Indian Ocean a zone allowing a flight per day between all of the islands. This is what we aim to get. So the new push of the Indian Ocean Commission is to really connect our space in a fundamental way. But we're also relooking at the way in which we organize ourselves and the way in which we are interacting with the rest of the world. And the Indian Ocean has a great advantage at the moment in being at the crossroads between two great emerging economic powers, Asia and Africa. So we are at the crossroads, we connect them, and we can really, I think, become a great hub for business exchanges and trade. And I think this is what the Indian Ocean Commission is aiming to do, linking to this summit coming up in Moroni.
Then how do you see the future of the IOR, the Indian Ocean Rim?
The Indian Ocean Rim is a much wider grouping and one which definitely has a bearing because there is no other grouping that covers all the way from South Africa, all of the countries on the coast, and then on the other side all the way to Indonesia and Australia. So the potential for linking up these areas is huge. They have massive markets which are very fragmented at present. So, and the Indian Ocean Rim necessarily has started on softer issues, on cultural cooperation, on technical cooperation, which are important. We cannot, and these sometimes are not headline issues. So the Indian Ocean Rim is perhaps seen as being a soft organization. But sometimes you need to start with these things to then build a wider project. So the Indian Ocean Commission is really specific because it brings in islands. But the Indian Ocean Commission will only succeed if also we can create partnerships with the wider region. As the Indian Ocean Commission, in fact, only has a population of, just over sort of about 25 million, over 20 million of which are actually only in Madagascar. So we are a very small population in this region. And our real value added will be what partnerships. First of all, we have to build our own infrastructure, but then partnerships that we will develop in and with those and around us. The Indian Ocean Rim is critical to this. So in fact, I know Seychelles, Mauritius, we are on the same page. We are actually aiming to create more connections and discussions between the two organizations, and it helps very much that the Secretariat of both are based in Mauritius.
Lastly, Mr. Minister, in 2008, the Seychelles was on the brink of an economic crisis. It had negative growth. How did you turn things around?
I think the first thing is that we believed that we could, because too often around the world, when a crisis hits, there is a tendency to basically blame everything, but not actually then take ownership of the solution, because the solution is very painful. There was one European Prime Minister who actually said, we all know exactly what needs to be done to solve the financial crisis. None of us knows how to get elected afterwards. So I say that sometimes Seychelles, our success was that we not only knew what to do, we knew how to get elected afterwards, because we won the election in 2011. But the key message was that we knew we had to do very difficult reforms. We reduced the public sector employees by over 12%. But we knew the fundamentals of our economy were good. We knew that we had a great tourism product. What we had to do was diversify the emitting markets, because Europe was in crisis and is only just now recovering. So the number of tourists that we could depend on coming from there, the growth was minimal. So we knew we had to diversify, and we've done that very successfully with Eastern Europe, with the Middle East, and now with China. And this has meant that there's been new revenue streams, there's been new opportunities, but the government has made sure that we have coupled all of the pain with proactive stances. So for example, we did have to retrench in the government, but we gave soft loans for micro-enterprises to be set up. All of those have contributed immensely to strengthen the economy. We also strengthened the welfare provisions that we had in place, so that nobody would be on the street. And today the result is employment is less than 2%. We have very high employment. We even import labor. We have over 12,000 expatriates working in the country because we have such a demand. And in fact, future projections show that the growth of demand in terms of number of jobs created and the number of local Seychelles entering the job market, there's a mismatch. So the success of our reforms was that we owned it from the start. We believed in them and we believed in ourselves. And even though we did it with the partnership of the IMF, we never said the IMF told us to do this. We said we are doing this because this is how we will solve our own problems. Some of those problems are because of our own difficulties that we have faced and the problems we have created for ourselves. But the majority of those problems were also linked to the very difficult situation we faced with the fuel crisis, the huge cost of importation of fuel, and the accumulation of debt over a period of time. But we were determined to deal with it, and we were very honest in how we approached it. I think that the ownership was the key.
2014, things are very different in the Seychelles.
Exactly, exactly.
Thank you, Mr. Minister.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.